Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Everything You've Always Wanted to Know About Publishing, but Were Afraid to Ask. We're so pleased that you could join us today. We've got a great panel lined up with editors-in-chief from 3 prominent water journals, so let's get started. On today's panel, we have Jason He, the editor-in-chief of Water Environment Research, published by the Water Environment Federation and Wiley. Jason is a professor at Washington University in St. Louis. We also have Lenny Konikow. Lenny is the editor-in-chief of Groundwater, published by the National Groundwater Association and Wiley. Lenny is an emeritus scientist from the U.S. Geological Survey. We also have Professor Venki Udameri, the editor-in-chief of the Journal of the American Water Resources Association, as well as the director of Texas Tech University Water Resources Center. Lastly, my name is Jennifer Satin, and I'm a senior editor at Wiley and the moderator for today's event. We have a hefty lineup of Q&A to get to for all of you today, so let's jump right in. This first batch of questions are going to deal with issues that arise before submission. So our first question is, what types of work are appropriate to publish? Jason, we'll start off with you.
Okay, good morning, afternoon, evening, depends where you are. So water environmental research, or we call WER, has been publishing research for over 90 years. It's among the oldest academic journal in water field. So we publish research work about water quality, water pollution, and especially water pollution control technologies. And we heavily focus on applied research. So unlike many other journals, when you submit a paper, they look for a novelty. So we have different understanding about novelty. So if your work has some new information, we'll consider that. How do we define new information? I give you an example. For example, when you develop a new reactor, new treatment system, that is new. Or if you adopt the existing reactor developed by others, but you are treating the new contaminants, that is new to us. So if you adopt a reactor developed by others and treat the contaminant that has been studied before, but you're applying some new method that can get the new information, advance our understanding about the treatment process. That is also new to WER. Or everything is already there. Reactor is published, the contaminant has been studied, research method has been used, but you're scaling up the reactor. That is also new to WER. So we know there's a much difference between bench scale reactor and a scaling up reactor, because when you scale up reactor, there's a lot of new information we never got from bench studies. So at WER, in addition to regular type of article like research paper, short communication review paper, we have a specially designed category of paper like case study that is suitable for the large scale research work. And we also have a perspective paper that allow the experienced research to share their finding, the experience in the past many years with peers. So we're looking for something new about water research. Yeah, that's from me.
Thank you, Jason. Lenny, same question over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. I represent Groundwater Journal, and we publish papers that are primarily focused on groundwater systems and groundwater issues. The primary consideration is that the paper must make an original contribution to the understanding or to the management of groundwater resources. Research papers are the most sought after, but case studies and practical applications are also acceptable if they include some particularly interesting results of interest to a broad international readership. We also publish articles that focus on new methods or new software tools, as well as occasionally an opinion piece. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lenny. And Venki, same question over to you.
Hello, all. So I represent the Journal of the American Water Resources Association, as we call it JAWRA for short. JAWRA is a broad multidisciplinary journal, so we are interested in multidisciplinary solutions to water resources. We particularly encourage original contributions that are papers that are looking at water from multiple different angles, particularly the physical sciences, the natural sciences, the social sciences coming together. or we are also interested in discipline-specific papers that are written for a broad multidisciplinary audience. So if you're part of a large project that involves multidisciplinary elements to solve a water problem, JAWRA would be a great place to publish that. Similarly, if you do a discipline-specific study, say in surface water system or in groundwater system, but you want your work to be useful to a broad range of audiences in the water community, then JAWRA would be a place as well. So historically, traditionally, we publish original technical papers, but we also publish short technical notes, as well as literature reviews and water commentaries on issues related to water policies and technologies.
Thanks, Venki. Our next question is, what is the basic format of a paper? And for this question, I'm going to go back to Venki.
Thank you, Jennifer. So a basic format of a paper, the first thing I want to emphasize here is that you need to know the author of your paper. You're not writing the paper for yourself, but you're writing the paper for an audience. So first step would be to know your audience. A typical paper setup would have a very strong introduction where you look at the appropriate literature, like, review the appropriate literature and make a case for your work. And probably towards the end of that paper, you would talk about the hypotheses or the research objectives that you want to address. And your flow should be such a way that when a reader comes to that section, they should say, yeah, that makes sense. Like, that is a gap that needs to be addressed. And then follow it up with a sound methodology when you talk about your experimental methods or field studies or modeling work that you're going to do, or a combination of all to address those research objectives. You're going to present very important results, discuss those results in the context of the research objectives, and finally make some general conclusions. Of course, what's very important element of a paper are also the references. It's very important that you put these references together. I strongly encourage that you use software like EndNote Plus or BibTeX or Mendeley. There are several other versions, several other software like that. So you compile them and then format them as per the journal requirements. The two other aspects that usually you'll see in a paper are your abstract and title, both of which are the first line of evidence of why people should read that paper. So those are very important as well. And in JAWRA in particular, we ask for a short research impact statement. This is a 200-character statement that you can use that we use to market your paper through social media. So that is increasingly becoming important as well. So I would say pay attention to those three aspects as well.
Great, thank you. Lenny, what else can you add to that?
Okay, excuse me. We'll start at the beginning, the title. The title of the manuscript needs to be short and impactful. It should generate broad interest and communicate the importance and relevance of the work. This is challenging, but very important to do. The title is the first thing that the editors and readers see, and the title will generate a fast impression of whether or not the editor might want to publish it or the audience might want to read it. The abstract, again, is another important element. It must indicate the essence of the results and why it matters. You should never say in an abstract, the paper describes this or that. Just say what you did, what the main results are, and why it's important. A logistical detail is that you should carefully review and follow the preparation and submission instructions of the particular journal for formatting and style of submitted manuscripts. Every journal is slightly different. Not paying attention to these details can certainly slow down the review process. You've got to remember you are publishing to communicate your results. Pay attention to the communication part. Invest a few hours studying the rules and art of writing a technical paper. It's an investment of your time that will pay off. So I have two suggestions. One, download a free copy of Suggestions to Authors of Reports of the U.S. Geological Survey. It's quite general and appropriate for any technical writing. The second suggestion, get a copy of the short classic book, The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. Read these two sources of information and pay attention.
Thanks, Lenny. Moving on to our next question here. What are some tips on writing a good paper and making the writing process go smoothly? I'm going to go back to Lenny for this one to start.
Okay, I think the first step is really to write an outline. Once you've written an outline, review it with a mentor or a colleague. Then start filling in the various sections, except perhaps the conclusion, saving that for last. But the writing exercise itself, filling in the various sections, should start very early in the project, very early in the study. Don't leave the writing to the very end of the project. Keep the manuscript as concise as possible. This will make it more readable and minimize page charges. Long descriptions of text can often be shortened and clarified by judicial use of references, tables, figures, and files of online supporting or supplemental information. What you have to do is make the contribution of your paper clear and emphasize the contribution, the original contribution of your work in your cover letter, as well as in the abstract, the introduction, and in the conclusions. Very important, before submitting a completed draft of your manuscript to the journal, ask a colleague to review it for you. This might add a week or so to the timing, but a constructive pre-review will increase the chances of having the paper pass the journal's review process by filtering out technical and editorial flaws. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lenny. Jason, same question over to you.
Yeah, Lenny has gave great details and suggestions. My comments is kind of relevant to the previous question because it's part of the writing is please read author guide. When you prepare a manuscript, that's really important. A simple step, but really important, can make your writing or preparation process a lot simpler. Read, go through author guide. Every journal has very detailed author guide. The second point is please check the recent paper published in the journal. That often give you a lot of information. Just check those officially published paper about the format, what components they include. So back to the preparation. Before you start to write, be familiar with the literature, because that's how you're going to prepare your introduction. So read, accumulate a lot. Remember, every paper is a story. So treat your paper as a story. How are you going to convince people why you do this research? Then how are you going to convince people your conclusion statement are right? So it's supported by the data you come out from your experiment. So when you present a data figure table, the function of those data information to support your statement and conclusion. It's not like you just simply describe the figure data, right? So let the reader to figure out what's your conclusion. Make it clear. You present your conclusion supported by your data and figure.
Great, thank you, Jason.
That's for me. Yep.
Our next question is, how should my colleagues and I decide on authorship? And so to start this one off, I'm going to go back to Jason.
So authorship is a very important element. So some publisher journal system come up with the different definition of the contribution. So basically you need to include the people who have made a significant contribution to your work. So how do we define contribution? In general, there are three categories. Intellectual contribution, for instance, they come up with a concept, has a lot of intellectual interaction discussion along the way. Second part is the data collection. So participate in the experiment test, help with the data analysis, so to collect the data. The third type of contribution is writing. So don't underestimate the writing. Writing is a very important role, important part of the manuscript. So it's largely depends on how much the contribution going to be, and it's decided by the authors. Because as an editor and a publisher, we have no way to identify the contribution. It's largely decided by the authors. And in each paper, there is a corresponding author or correspondence or corresponding author. Nowadays, the meaning of corresponding or correspondence author is beyond the correspondence. It's often the person who is in charge of this particular project or research. So that's should be made clear. So try not to have your graduate student to be a corresponding author, correspondence author, because it has more meaning. And when different authors have kind of an equal contribution, it's hard to define equal, but often when you have a research cross the disciplinary, so you want to share the credit. So we have a co-first author or co-corresponding author. That is allowed in many journals. So when you feel you have the contribution from different disciplines, so it's better to decide the authorship before the submission. So in the past, we have seen some problems after paper accepted, author come up with a problem. Who should be the correspondence author? Who should be the first author? Please decide that before you make submission. So that means that submission, the authorship should get approved by all the authors before you make submission. So my general suggestion here, I cannot decide authorship for you as an editor. Again, you need to, as author, you need to decide that. You understand who make contribution. My general suggestion is be generous to share the credit, because nowadays a lot of research are being conducted through collaboration, right? So we cannot do things alone. So be generous, and also at the same time be ethical. So try not to include someone who never made any contribution as a co-author. So we need to follow some research ethical. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. That was great. Venki, same question over to you.
Sure. Yeah, so Jason covered most of the things. I'm going to touch on a few things. One point is that so typically the decision on who should be the first author and who should be the corresponding author, and what should be the the sequence of authors is a very important discussion that needs to happen, and that needs to happen very openly and honestly. I would say that needs to happen as paper gets written, so not as a last afterthought. There are some really good guidelines if you go out on the web and look for it. There are several guidelines on how that should be, how to choose authorship order and such. Some things to keep in mind is that the role of an author is not over till the paper gets published. So when you write a paper, the paper is going to go through multiple revisions, and then so there has to be some rewriting that needs to be done. There needs to be some experimentations that probably will need to be done on some papers, things like that. So keep that in mind, because most journals will not let you change the order of authorship or let you add authors down the road. So it's very important to keep in mind that, especially if you're a graduate student and you're going to lead the lab and the paper is half written, then recognize that somebody else might have to pick up some of that brunt of that work. So those have to be factored in as well as to who gets to be the lead author and who doesn't. So have an honest discussion among your group and figure out. As editors, we really can't say who the authors is, but we do recognize that everybody who's listed there, there's an expectation that they have contributed substantially to the journals. I also recommend that you go and look at the Committee of Publication Ethics. They have some really good discussions on vanity authorship, ghost authorship, honorary authorships, and other things that can, literally ruin careers of people if it's not done properly. So it's a very bad mark to have, and can get very contentious. So, but overall, the paper should be a pleasant writing experience, and figuring out what the authorship order is plays a big role in making that happen.
Great, thank you, Venki. And Lenny, last but not least.
Okay, again, I'll repeat, authorship should be limited to those who contributed directly to the research and or to the writing of the manuscript in a non-trivial way. It should not be given as an honorific or for administrative management, funding, or for reviewing. In general, the author should be listed in order of magnitude of their individual contributions. Clearly, this is sometimes a subjective assessment. As far as first author, if two collaborators contributed equally and they can't easily or obviously come to an agreement, my suggestion, flip a coin for who's first. It works. I've done that system myself, and it works. It's a way to deal with it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lenny.
Quickly add to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, most journals, so if you have an issue where people have contributed equally, and of course, you have to pick one author, clearly flipping a coin is way to go, but most journals do allow you to put some sort of, a section saying that everybody contributed equally. So check with the individual journal to see if they will allow you to put a line or statement to that effect, because many journals do.
Great, thank you for that point. So before we move on from this section, I just wanted to address one of the questions that I received here, which is someone asked if we could send the information along with the writing resources that Lenny mentioned from the USGS. We will do that. For attending this webinar and for registering, you will receive some follow-up information via email afterwards, and links to those documents will be available in that email, so you can look for that. So moving on, our next batch of questions will be focusing on the submission process. Our first question here being, how do I choose the right journal? Venki, I'm going to start with you for this one.
Sure. So there are, as you can see on the slide, there are a lot of journals in the water space. So they all deal with different aspects of water. So it's very important that you select the most appropriate journal for your work, because that plays a very big role in your work getting highlighted and being read by people who should be reading, people in your area who would be most interested in this work. So, so first things to keep in mind would be to read through, see what papers you're citing. Where are you citing these? Where are those papers that you're citing? Which journals have they been published in? So they usually give you a good idea of where your work will likely fit. That's one. The second thing to keep in mind is I would strongly suggest that you go read the aims and scope of the journals, that you can narrow down the journals by looking at what journals you have cited, narrow it down, and then go back and read the aims and scope, perhaps read a few more papers, more recent papers, especially if you've cited some of the older papers, you may want to read the recent papers from those journals to see if they're still publishing in that area that you are interested in. That will give you a good clue of where to go. Again, you also have to see whether your work is more theoretical, more applied, or more interdisciplinary in nature. So that also gives you good guidelines on where you want to be, where your work will best fit the journal. So making sure that you send your work to the best possible journal, which has the best fit in terms of the compatibility between your research and what the journal's aims and scope are, gives you maximum visibility. So that's what I recommend that you do. Again, I would not try to, please, one of the suggestions would be to not just look at impact factors or some broad metrics to say, I'm going to go to this journal. Those are really important. They can be looked at, but really the compatibility between your research and the aims and scope of the journal are really should be the driving factor of where you choose to publish.
Great, thank you, Venki. Lenny, how about you?
Okay, well, for a particular piece of work that you do, you write up some research, there's probably half a dozen different journals that would be an appropriate outlet for that particular work. So choosing the right one is somewhat a subjective process, but it involves some trade-offs. As Venki mentioned, one guiding factor can be the impact factor of the various journals, but others include the breadth of the subject matter covered by a journal, the size of the readership, and the nature of the audience. So you could ask yourself, who do you want to read your work? What types of scientists or audience do you want to see what you've written? This would involve considering the depth, breadth, scale, and generality of your work. Higher impact journals like Science and Nature are the most difficult to get a paper accepted for. They require the most brevity or conciseness, but they carry the most prestige. A more specialized journal typically has a lower impact factor, but a more specialized audience in the same field as you and as your work. So there's definitely some advantage of going towards these more specialized journals. Perhaps you want to consider page charges. Some journals have high charges, others have low or no charges. Some journals can publish quickly, while others may have a lag of up to a year or even longer. So there's a whole spectrum, and you have lots of choices, and you really have to weigh the trade-offs. Over the course of your career, over the course of my career, what I've done is I've tried to publish in a variety of journals to make sure that my name and my work gets out to the broadest range of disciplines and people.
Thank you, Lenny. All great points. Jason, you have anything to add?
Yeah, both Venki and Lenny have covered a lot of great information. I think I just repeated one point to remind attendee authors. When you really have no idea which journal to choose, check the reference in your manuscript. I think Venki covered that point. So check the journals where most of your cited references are published. That's a very good, strong indication of where you should publish this work. Actually, that's a point we as editor often use. See whether your work is good fit in our journal. So if you never publish all your references are not published in an environmental journal, so why should we consider your work in our journal? So that means your research is out of the scope. Another point is when you have like equal option among several journals, you might want to also consider the open access journal sometimes, because open access journal means that everyone can freely access. Of course, that depends whether you have a right resource or funding to cover the publication cost. But that become increasing attraction of the option, the open access journal.
Thanks, Jason. That's a great point about OA journals. Yes. Okay, our next question here is, should I post my paper to a preprint server? So Lenny, why don't you start us off here?
Well, this is a fairly new development in the field, and I've never done so. So I guess my impression is I don't particularly think it's a good idea, and I see more downside than upside. Perhaps it's like releasing the plans to a new invention before you get a patent. You're making your material accessible and quotable before completion of the peer review process, and that peer review process can find and fix errors and inconsistencies that need to be corrected. So by posting a preprint, you risk having your name associated with material that you later modify, but you can't undo a bad impression from that might come from having erroneous or revision-worthy material out there for all to see and attribute to you. Many journals will post an early view version of your manuscript very quickly after approval. So any time advantage of getting a preprint informally out there first seems small, yet there are some real risks associated with it.
Thanks, Lenny. And Venki, what do you think on this topic?
Yeah, so in JARA, we do allow papers to be on a preprint, or a version of early version of the paper to be on the preprint. So the preprints are supposed, the original intent of the preprints is to you some feedback, so it is almost like having your colleague review. You're now trying to put it to a broader audience, but you do run the risk of that work being open, and certainly not having the benefit of had a peer review. So if the intent is to get some review, or from that's the reason why preprints were developed, but particularly in the COVID era, a lot of papers, particularly that were half-baked in terms of science, came out and almost killed the careers of some of very distinguished scientists. So you got to really weigh the risks of putting it in a preprint vis-a-vis, waiting for the journal to finish its review process. But the important point is check with your journal to see if it's acceptable to have a paper on preprint while it's being submitted. Some journals allow it, some journals don't. So you don't want to have shock in the end that, we went through the review process and we can't publish it here because the journal never allowed it. So it's important to get that squared away up front if you were to go down that route.
Thanks, Venki. That's a very good point when it comes to preprints. All right, our next question here is, how should I handle data availability issues? And for this one, I'm going to go back to Venki.
Yeah, so a good scientific paper is one that provides access to the data that went into building building the science behind that paper. But at the same time, we also recognize that that data is also important to perhaps to the authors to write other papers or come up with other insights. So most journals now require you to have a data availability statement. In most water journals, we recommend that either the data be made available if it can, or at least find ways in which others interested in that data can contact the authors and see if they can get hold of that data. So nonetheless, the data availability provides a significant amount of transparency to your research, and it makes your research so much more reproducible, and as a result, so much more strong. So again, the counter to that is, especially if you are the creator of the data, you may want to mine that data before others. So again, my recommendation would be check with the journal specifically. More and more journals and more funding agencies in particular requiring that the data coming out of that research be publicly available. So there are some really good servers out there where you can that can serve as repositories where you can get DOIs. Quasi is one hydrologic organization that actually provides a place to put your data. There are a few others as well. So you may want to consider making your data as available as you can, as required by your funding or agencies, or based on your needs. And that would be another thing to look at in terms of like selecting a journal. Some journals require you to put all the data. Some are, almost all of them these days require some sort of a statement in terms of data availability. So another thing to check before you submit, so there are no surprises.
Great, thank you, Venki. So our next group of questions is going to concern what happens during the peer review process. I know this process often seems very opaque to authors. So our first question is, why is the review process taking so long? For this one, Jason is going to start us off.
So I guess this question is what many authors care about or may have complained about, is a long review process or long processing process. To address this question, I guess for authors, you want to know or understand what's going on behind the scene. So after you submit the paper, what's going to happen? So a typical procedure, once you submit the manuscript, there are a few steps. The first step is kind of journal office format check. Many journals have this. So they check if you have all the necessary components to move to the next stage. The next stage, the submission gonna be assigned to editor, handling editor. Okay, the handling editor assigned based on the area or the topic of your submission. Then handling editor can start she gonna do the evaluation. So at each stage there could be reject. I think we're gonna talk about rejection later. So if the handling editor decide to send out to the external review, then he or she gonna start to invite the reviewer. You can see every step here takes some time, right? Longer or shorter. So when you check the status of your submission, you can see sometimes depends on the submission system, you can see with the editor. So this with editor means that your submission has been assigned to the handling editor. Then it's up to the handling editor how long the editor wants to take to the next step. It could be like 2 days, 1 day, or it could be 2 weeks, 2 months. So I'm an author myself, so I've been experienced a variety of process and time period. So this part largely depends on the handling editor. Once handling editor decide to send out to external review, they're gonna invite the review, send out the invitation. Many of you probably also receive an invitation to review a submission. Then you're given like a few days to consider whether you're gonna accept or not. You see the time being spent here. After you decide to accept the review invitation, often a review being given like 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks to complete review. So that's a typical process. And keep in mind, the review are busy, right? You're all busy, you're all review. So I cannot complete in 3 weeks. I may need another 1 week, 2 weeks, or I may need a month. So it all happens. There's some reviews, rare case, but happens, who accept the review invitation and never return review. So we have those late review quite often. And now the ball kick back to the handling editor. How are we gonna deal with the late review? So some handling editor gonna send a reminder. System can also send automatic reminder email. And at WER, I also encourage my associate editor to send a personal reminder email to a reviewer. Hey, your review is late. Please return your comments so we can make a decision. So something like that to try to remind the review. So we try to do our best to reduce this review process at the WER, the average time from submission to the first decision. So those are the after external review. It's on average, it's about 30 days. So you can imagine we try to control this process within 30 days. It's the average time. So some submission can take much shorter time. Some submission may take longer time. On average, 30 days. Okay. So personally, if I submit a manuscript to a journal that need like 3 months to reach first decision, I probably not gonna do that next time. But I try to give you overall information what's going on. So it could be delayed by editors. Then it's really the editor's responsibility to make it faster. And a larger part is review part. And we cannot really force review to do something. So here I really encourage all of you, because you are authors and you are also reviews. I encourage all of you to be reviewer. So it's a service to the community. It's also make us to think how we want to treat a submission. Do we want our own submission to be treated just like what I'm doing now, hold for like 6 months? Probably not. So then everyone contributed to this process, then we can possibly make this process shorter. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. That was great. Lenny, would you like to add anything?
I would, thank you. I'd say the review process, sometimes it goes smoothly and it's very fast, could be done in a few weeks. Sometimes it's pretty darn slow. Sometimes it's just a toss of the dice. It's hard to predict, but what I can predict is that if you have a well-written, well-organized paper, it'll sail through the review process a lot faster because it's easier to read, if not a pleasure to read. A poorly written paper takes longer to read and evaluate by a reviewer, partly because it's painful to read. It's difficult to understand what the author's trying to say. And so you put it down and come back another day. So how well you write the paper is a factor. But basically, we're talking about late reviews occur regardless of the quality of the paper. As the editor-in-chief and as a journal, we're at the mercy of volunteer reviewers. We have limited control. Sometimes they just don't come through, even when they promise to. We try to get 3 reviewers on a paper, but often are forced to settle for 2, and occasionally rely on just 1 reviewer plus the executive editor. For one recent manuscript, we had 15 reviewers and associate editors all decline to review it, and some of them simply did not respond to our requests. I'm sure these same scientists would scream bloody murder if their own manuscript were delayed by such inaction. So as editors, we do the best we can to keep the process moving. We have certainly reminder letters that go out, sometimes automatically. What I will say is, if you think it is taking too long to hear a decision about your manuscript, send an email inquiry to the editor-in-chief. Personally, I don't object to getting such inquiries and will always respond quickly with an answer. Plus, I occasionally learn that a manuscript has somehow unexplainedly gotten lost in the electronic manuscript processing system. That's rare, but it's happened twice this year already. Other times I see that a reviewer is way overdue and I can send a gentle personal nudge from me, and that usually gets the review completed pretty quickly.
Great, thank you, Lenny. Our next question here is, how should I address a reviewer's comments or criticisms? And I'm going to go back to Lenny to start us off with this one.
Okay, thanks. Well, basically, we ask that authors carefully consider and address all review comments and document their responses, including the reasoning or basis for their response. When a revised manuscript is submitted, that's one of the first things we look at, the quality of the responses or the rebuttals, and whether or not all review comments have been considered. Now, authors do not have to agree to every change or suggestion, but if they don't, they have to offer a defense why they don't want to make a change or, in response to a particular comment. One thing that editors really do not like to see and may not tolerate is an author's response that reflects their belief that they or their work is superior and that they are smarter than the people who reviewed it, or negative or derogatory attitude towards the reviewer. That just doesn't go over well. While an author doesn't have to agree with a reviewer, and reviewers can make mistakes, that's possible, authors' responses have to be civil and respectful of the time and effort that a reviewer puts in. Implying or even saying, as I've seen, that a reviewer or an editor is ignorant or unqualified to review your masterpiece, this will often generate little sympathy for the author, and it generates a lot of skepticism about the author's revision. Doesn't go over well.
Thanks for that, Lenny. Jason, same question to you.
Yeah, Lenny has really good information, so I add a few more points. So first of all, respond every point, so point by point. Don't miss any comments. Don't miss any comments. You agree or disagree, provide your response. Don't miss any comments. One hint here is, often the time you're asked to make change, right? So you add a new paragraph or something, new table, new figure. Put every change in the response file. All right, put everything. So when you do the revision, you have a revised manuscript and you have a separate file called response to reviewers. Add every piece of change, new table, new data, new figure in this separate response to review files. That allow review easily to see what you have done. So don't just put a line number, page number, say, hey, go check. That's the change I made. I made a change in line 35 and on page 5. That's not a convenient way. All right. So you've done so much revision, invest so much time, and just copy all the change into a response file. That make review really more convenient. The next is like what Lenny mentioned is attitude issue. So when you see a lot of comments from review, don't be angry. Well, that happens to everyone. So when we see a lot of comments, we say, oh geez, so much things I have to, so much time I have to spend on that. Don't be angry. Think about this. Those reviewers are the first batch of readers of your work. They probably the only readers who go through your paper in such detail. So once your paper published, many other readers just when they check your paper, check abstract and major result, that's it. They're not going to try to identify what's the problem in your paper. And those reviewers are probably they're at least the first batch group of the people who read your work in a great detail carefully. So take advantage of their work and the time and appreciate that. So be polite and be respectful. All right, don't be angry. There's no point to be angry. Even you disagree with something, be respectful, provide reasonable rebuttal. Yeah, that's from me.
Thanks, Jason. And Venki, would you like to add anything?
Sure. So keep in mind that the reviewer's job is to take a good paper and make it great. So any comments that they give, again, as Lenny and Jason have emphasized, have to be viewed positively. You may disagree with it, but you have to have good reasons you're disagreeing with the reviewer. And that in itself is a good learning experience because you probably will clarify a lot of concepts or rewrite something to make it more clearer. So having a positive attitude towards the reviews go a long way in getting your papers published quickly because it just makes the paper better.
Great, thank you, Venki. So our next question here is, how much similarity is considered plagiarism? Jason's going to start us off on this one.
Okay, so this is actually quite a common issue nowadays because now we have the software like Authenticate and other software that can easily detect the similar content and similar writing. So regarding how much similarity, often we get the question from author, what's the percentage? So below 20%, 15%, or 25%, my manuscript is safe. My view, my personal opinion, and also I talk to my associate editors. We do not use a single percentage value as cutoff value. So it's not like 15% it's a safe, 25% is bad. Instead, we look into where and what similar contents are. So for 15, I reject the submission with 15% similarity because 11% from single source, and those similar writing appear in whole paragraph, whole section. Even the overall, it's only 15%. That similarity is quite serious. And I've sent the manuscript with 40% similarity to external review because those similar contents mostly short phrase, and the terms. Right? It's hard to avoid those things, and I don't think author really spend a lot of time to copy those things from other manuscript. It's just, I mean, those software has its own limitation. And by the way, we do not include a reference list in the similarity evaluation. So that's why we still need people to evaluate that. Some controversial part is the method section. So is that a big concern if I copy the description from my prime paper? Well, it's in a gray zone. It's highly dependent on individual journal and the publisher's policy. So at the WER journal I work with, so if you have a large amount of the similar content, whole section in the method section, whole subsection copied from your own paper, that's a problem. So we are against the whole section copy. All right, so we understand the researcher uses similar research methods. I myself also a researcher, but still every paper similarity issue is not just a writing issue. It's actually the attitude, how you treat your manuscript. For carefully prepared manuscript, in my lab, we're gonna go through like 7 to 10 times revision. So that draft's gonna be rewritten a few times. There's really little chance of similar, large amount of similar contents with our own papers after rewritten several times. So that's an attitude issue. So please be careful. When you have similarity issue, when editor evaluates your submission, it's not only just writing. We can see how much care you put into prepare your manuscript. So try to avoid the copy of similar contents in the whole sentence and the whole paragraph. That's the key.
Great, thank you, Jason. And Lenny, do you have anything to add?
Jason made excellent points and good coverage. Groundwater Journal also uses Authenticate software to check for duplication of text and plagiarism between a submitted manuscript and other publications or internet documents, including preprints. I'm amazed that Authenticate does an incredible job. Its search engines somehow find obscure reports and publications, though perhaps not all. It ranks the duplication on a percentage scale. I'm not sure how it comes up with that. Generally, after looking at this carefully as I started this job, I find that now if the display percentage is 20% or greater, I will take a very close look at the nature of the duplication. If it's substantially less than 20%, at this point now, I assume that plagiarism is probably not a problem. When I do look at the nature of the duplication, sometimes it's clear that the duplication is innocent and trivial. It's a word here, a word there, or sometimes even a phrase. It just not meaningful. And other times it appears that the duplication really resents unattributed copying of material from an unacknowledged source. Sometimes a reference is given, but no quote marks are placed around direct quotes, and that's not acceptable. Even if it's from your own previously published papers, whether it's methods, description of an area, whatever. This is considered self-plagiarism and is not acceptable either.
Great, thank you, Lenny. So we have two more questions we're going to try to quickly get through in the time that we have left. The first one is, why was my paper rejected and what should I do now? Venki is going to start us off with that one.
Sure. This is usually not the news any author wants to hear, but it happens. And, it has happened to the best of the people. I know a lot of top researchers who have had their papers rejected. So having a paper rejected is not necessarily a bad thing. So when a paper does get rejected, it is frustrating. So one thing is you have to get over that frustration. So probably have to give yourself some compassion, and recognizing that it might recognizing that it has happened to the best of the best. So the other thing would be to really go look at the reviewers' comments and what went wrong and why did the paper get rejected. So a lot of times we tend to desk reject papers when there is a difference between the aims and scope of the journal vis-a-vis the paper. So that way, the rejection is done quickly so that the authors don't lose a lot of time. Sometimes I've seen is that papers get major revisions, but the authors don't do a very good job of addressing those comments. So a lot of rejections that have happened primarily because multiple reviewers have emphasized a certain point, and then the authors simply have glossed over that point or not made a very convincing case. So in those cases, you have to probably look at how best to improve the marketability of the paper, what needs, how should it be presented, and why was your point of view not viewed favorably by the reviewers and the editorial team. I've had a few cases where we've had papers come to minor revisions, and then the authors were adamant to make one or two changes, and that sometimes can be a deal killer. So that can also be an issue. So the paper can get rejected at any point in time until it's published. So it's important to keep in mind that anytime there is a review, whether it's a major revision or a minor revision, those revisions are taken seriously and addressed. A few other reasons why papers might get rejected is authors may write something or sneak in something that may be after the post-review process, and usually that means that it has to go back to the reviewers who may not agree with it. So that just makes the process all the more delayed and painful. But when there is a paper rejected, you got to really look at what is the cause for that rejection, and then some are easy, like it was not a good fit, the journal was not a good fit. Those are easy rejections. The more difficult ones are the ones that happen after 1 or 2 rounds of reviews. There you have to really look careful about why, what went wrong or what fell short in terms of meeting the expectations of the reviewers or addressing the comments of the reviewers and editorial team. But again, you got to take the reviews in the stride and positively to make sure. It doesn't necessarily mean that the paper itself is bad. It just means that portions of the paper probably need reworking and need to be reassessed and how it should be presented.
Thank you, Venki. And we are going to move on to our last question having to do with the publication process, which is, my paper was accepted. Now what? So Jason, I'm going to give you the last word today to close us off.
All right, so once your paper accepted, congratulations. Now you can take a break for a second, not completely done yet. So you're still gonna need to put a few more effort, like proof, right? So it depends on the publisher journal. You're gonna get a proof. Proof is your last chance to make change to your paper. So once your paper is officially published, you detect some problem, you cannot change it. You have to make additional error term or other way to correct it. So proof, be careful, do spend time. A lot of journals give you 48 hours. If you need a longer time, that's okay. But do spend time on proofing and try to detect any problem. And once it's officially published, think about promote it. That's your work. You spend a lot of time, effort on it. Let more readers know, let more of your peers know. So promote your own work and the paper, for instance, through like social media, Twitter, Facebook. That's a very good way to promote your papers.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much to everyone for attending today's webinar. We hope that you have found this to be useful and informative. Please be on the lookout in your email, as we'll be sending out some follow-up information, including a helpful packet with a guide on how to publish. So thank you again to our speakers, and thanks again for attending, and we hope that you all have a great day.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.